Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update, last minute, late night rant about, well, unsurprisingly, Mike Johnson, but also the Republicans in Congress who are not supportive of aid to Ukraine. Why am I ranting about this at the moment? Well, it turns out that Republicans are signaling they're happy to support Israel, but not Ukraine. As Tim White says, Trump and his acolytes continue to do Putin's bidding with a lame excuse that they need to help Israel and that help is urgent. Phillips O'Brien here says, so all you Republican supporters who say you are pro-Ukraine, and I guess he's talking to some of my viewers here, Speaker Johnson putting a bill forward specifically cutting Ukraine out. Stop pretending that you can support MAGA and be pro-Ukraine. Of course, there are different elements of the Republican Party, and there will be many Republicans who will be quite frustrated about this, those who are very much pro-Ukraine. So I don't want to broad brush stroke people here, tar people with the same brush, but there are definitely some issues within the Republican Party concerning what should be a pretty obvious decision to support Ukraine for so many reasons, and many reasons that we discussed over the last few months. The amazing thing, says O'Brien, is that there are large majorities in the House and the Senate that would support Ukraine aid, but Trump, Johnson, MAGA are so desperate to harm Ukraine and help Putin that they are doing this. It's not the border issue, it's serving Putin's interests. I just talked to you about Tucker Carlson visiting Moscow right now. He's just been at the Bolshoi Ballet. What is he doing? Why is Tucker Carlson in Moscow? Again, the connections between certain elements of the Republican Party and Putin's Kremlin is, though those connections seem to be fairly well established at the moment. This goes back to something I've been saying for a while, says O'Brien. Even if Ukraine aid gets passed, which looks increasingly less likely, Europe must start preparing for a future without the US. The US cannot be trusted to come to Europe's support if needs be, as Trump has made very clear. So basically, as long as it takes meant until Donald Trump told the GOP not to do it. Phillips O'Brien is a professor of strategic studies at the University of St. Andrews, senior advisor to CSIS, and author of How the War Was Won, second most powerful man in the world. Okay, so he is pretty damning of the Republicans, at least certain types of Republican in the House, as a result of what has been declared. Just to remind you here, in a reversal, Speaker Johnson will put a bill on the floor to send $17.6 billion to Israel with no corresponding spending cuts. A reversal meant to preempt the Senate's border and national security supplemental. Here's a letter from Johnson to the House. This plan is a shift for Johnson. The House passed a bill that tied Israel aid to domestic spending cuts. Senate leaders plan to release their supplemental spending bill this weekend. In the letter, Johnson said the House would not give swift consideration to that legislation. I'm not going to read you the letter, but I'm going to just dip into a Washington Post article on the subject. But just to give you what No Report says, the House of Representatives will vote on $17.6 billion aid bill for Israel next week, which doesn't include aid to Ukraine. U.S. House Speaker Johnson said, this man, unbelievable. And Ukraine Battle Map says, honestly, that's not what I thought. When he said they would split the bill apart, I thought they would split Ukraine aid apart. He is responsible for the deaths of many Ukrainians. Just goodness me. The idea that Israel is particularly needy of funding when it is quite easily flattening Gaza without an awful lot of assistance. I mean, there is talk about munitions from other countries and whatnot, or the US particularly, but the aid to Israel is not urgently needed. And you can argue about the morality of aid to Israel in a wholly different way than aid to Ukraine. These are two completely separate entities with two completely different moral calculations and political calculations. Israel does not need that 17.6 billion in the same way that Ukraine needs 61 billion. That has been held up in Congress now for 4 months. These people are not good people. Speaker Johnson is probably, and I'm speculating here, trying to get that through because he's a Christian nationalist. That's not a derogatory or pejorative term. That is literally a technical term for someone who is effectively a theocrat. He's openly suggested that he's not actually even constitutional. He sees the Bible as what should be the guiding law for the country of the US, and he advocates for a biblical theocracy. And therefore, a support for Israel is much more in line, I would say, with his entire worldview than kind of many other things that he should be considering, such as aid for Ukraine. Washington Post here says House to vote on a standalone Israel aid bill, setting up showdown with the Senate. Washington Post says, quote, quoting Johnson from his letter, quote, the Senate will no longer have excuses, however misguided, against swift passage of this critical support for our ally. Very powerful language there he's applying to Israel and saying not an awful lot at the moment about Ukraine. The article continues, House Republicans' surprise announcement to send the Senate a standalone Israel funding bill sets up dueling votes in both chambers, which remain apart on how to fund border security and Ukraine in divided government. Notably absent from the proposal is any funding for Ukraine, which has faced significant dwindling of support by the House GOP majority. The measure also does not include a border security proposal, as House Republicans have insisted the Senate take up their bill passed last year. And then just towards the end, just to give Ukraine another kick in the shins. And moreover, Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Republican from Georgia, representative, threatened using a motion that led the way for former Representative Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, to be ousted as Speaker if Johnson brings a bill aiding Ukraine to the House floor, while Representative Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, has floated triggering the measure if Johnson brings up a bad border security legislation for a vote. So Johnson is being bribed by certain members, MAGA members of the Republican Party, that if he does bring Ukrainian aid forward in a bill, he will be ousted from his seat. So it's just not a good situation. And my personal opinion is those Republicans should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. Absolutely ashamed. There is no good reason for their positioning on Ukraine whatsoever. And I find it despicable because that aid is absolutely vital for the Ukrainians. People are dying on the front lines, and they are running out of incredibly vital munitions and supplies that otherwise would have been supplied already 4 months ago. Anyway, let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Are you as upset as I am? Let me know. In the meantime, toodle pits, I need some sleep.